One of the pivotal moments in Flier's history is her grounding at Midway Atoll, but how and why did that happen? Midway is one of the northernmost islands in the Hawaiian chain and became a vital submarine and airbase following the Battle of Midway in 1942. A thick coral wall surrounds the two main islands inside. Sand Island, the larger one, held the submarine docks, repair facilities, housing, and other buildings for personnel. Smaller Eastern Island held the main runways for airplanes. The only way in and out of Midway for submarines was an artificial channel blasted through the southern reef wall. From the surface, it looked about 900 feet wide, but at the smallest point, this channel was only 400 feet wide and 40 feet deep. Considering a World War II-era submarine is 312 feet long and has a 16-foot draft when surfaced, there's little room for error. To keep submarines in that lane, a series of 4 buoys were placed on the right and left sides of the safe lane. Normally, when a submarine came to Midway for refueling, she contacted Midway as she approached, then anchored south of the entrance buoys, waiting for a pilot. He would come out on a 50-foot motor launch, similar to this one, pull alongside, transfer aboard, and help the captain navigate into the harbor. These pilots were trained and experienced in Midway's tricky currents, ground swells, and underwater topography. This system worked well, and dozens of submarines whipped in and out of Midway during World War II. So, what went wrong in Flier's case? To begin with, the weather. Midway was in the midst of a days-long winter storm that was so fierce all her airplanes had been evacuated. The rain frequently cut visibility down to a quarter mile, or less. In addition, none of Flier's officers on duty, including her captain, John Crowley, and the officer of the deck, Lieutenant James Liddell, had been to Midway before. Despite studying charts and the information Pearl Harbor had given them, there were still many details left unknown. Still, Crowley followed procedures, informing Midway of his approach and mooring south of the entrance buoys to await the pilot. Flier's dock at the base was already assigned, and Crowley had the maneuvering watch stationed on the after gun deck to help bring the pilot's motor launch alongside and help him aboard. The seas were rough. The waves washed high against the bridge, 20 feet above the water's surface. While waiting, Crowley and Liddell noticed something odd. The number 4 buoy was gone. Once through the entrance buoys, there would be no way to know where the safe eastern edge of the channel was until they were already through the reef wall. When the pilot came out, he was not on the normal 50-foot motor launch, but on the USS Negwagon, a sturdy 100-foot tugboat, exact sister to this one. The captains of Flyer Negwagon quickly realized there was no safe way to come alongside and transfer the pilot, so Negwagon kept a safe distance. Someone on Negwagon tried to yell to Flyer through a megaphone, but the storm drowned him out. Finally, Negwagon moved in front of Flyer, signaled, "Follow me," in semaphore, and headed through the channel herself, leading the way. Crowley followed, and Flyer, going forward at 10 knots, passed between the entrance buoys with no trouble. Suddenly a ground swell rose and shoved Flyer violently to the left. Crowley ordered a new course back into the channel. A submarine can't turn on a dime, but a few minutes later Flyer curved back to course when another ground swell grabbed her and forced her to the right, carrying Flyer to the far side of the channel. Crowley ordered left full rudder, and Flyer began to curve back again into the channel when she suddenly struck bottom with a blow, lifted gracefully, and slammed down again, pointing north-northwest. With every large wave, Flyer lifted for just a moment, and Crowley ordered starboard prop ahead full, port back full, left full rudder, in the desperate hope that with a large enough ground swell, Flyer might turn far enough to fall off her perch. From there, she could either head back out to sea or quickly anchor and ride out the storm. The maneuvering watch, now anchor detail, led by Chief Torpedoman Kenneth Gwynn and consisting of James Call, Clyde Gerber, and Waite Daggy, came down off the after gun deck and headed for the anchor at the bow. Suddenly a huge wave swept the foredeck, knocking Call and Gerber into the water and slamming Daggy into the steel conning tower, injuring him badly. Gwynn helped Daggy back to the after gun deck and inside, while Lieutenant Liddell located the men in the water. Call was 20 yards out near Flyer's bow and drifting quickly out to sea. Gerber was also 20 yards out, but caught in a different current. He was being swept down the length of Flyer's port side. Men scrambled to throw life belts and life rings after them, but to no avail. Suddenly, a large wave caught Flyer under her starboard bow, lifting and rolling her 35 degrees, threatening for a moment to roll her over. She fell, struck the reef, settled again, still stuck, now pointing 300 degrees, or west-northwest. When Flyer paused, Liddell called for 2 strong swimmers to go in after the men. George Banchero and Joseph Lea volunteered. Banchero went into the water quickly, wearing a life belt and carrying a life ring, but he was caught in the same current that was dragging Gerber past Flyer's stern and toward Midway's eastern island. Liddell signaled to both of them to head for that island, rather than exhaust themselves fighting their way back to Flyer. Lea, attached to a lifeline, wearing a life belt, went in after Call, who was already out of sight, but he quickly drifted back to Flyer's stern and was hauled aboard. Flyer called Midway, asking for an immediate tow, a boat to pick up Banchero and Gerber, and asking for crews to keep a watch out for Call. Over the next hour, Flyer slowly turned south as each large groundswell lifted her higher and higher on the reef. Her rudder and propellers struck the coral repeatedly, smashing themselves to uselessness. Inside, the men tried to ride out the storm, checking constantly for signs that Flyer's hull had been ripped open. But for now, she seemed whole. Suddenly, Flyer got good news from Midway. A submarine rescue ship just happened to be in port. USS Macaw, designed to rescue submarines and their crews, and less than a year old, had been en route to the Marshall Islands when her water tanks became contaminated, and she was ordered to turn to Honolulu. She had pulled into Midway just before the storm hit. Now, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Paul Burton, and with a Midway pilot aboard, she'd volunteered to come out and rescue Flyer. Macaw came out of the storm and anchored near the entrance buoys, trying to float a line to Flyer for a quick tow off the reef. But the currents refused to cooperate, so Macaw sent a message to Flyer, saying they were going to head back into the channel and use the current streaming out of Midway to float a line down to her. Whether Macaw slipped or broke her anchor cable before she was ready to move, or whether she was unable to get up enough speed to beat the currents and swells that were bashing Flyer on the reef, was not recorded. But minutes later, Macaw sent Flyer the heart-wrenching message: "We are aground." And there they were, sitting only 300 feet west of Flyer, her stern in the channel, partially blocking the entrance. Worse, Commander Burton soon heard his engine room was flooding with seawater. Macaw had been ripped open on the reef. Flyer, out of options for the day, and with what little sunlight there was fading, filled all of her ballast tanks and manually dropped her anchor, hoping to ride out the storm with as little damage as possible.